Good evening, and welcome to this little corner of stories. It's a pleasure to be with you tonight. I ask you to lean in close for the story I'm about to tell. My husband died suddenly of a heart attack in his lover's bed. Despite this, his family insisted I pay for the funeral with my Platinum Amex. In that very moment, I canceled the card, sold the luxurious Upper East Side apartment we shared, and abandoned them. The next day, all 5 members of my in-laws found themselves on the street. That night, New York City was sleeping soundly. An evening shower had left the asphalt glistening, and the soft glow of the streetlights cast long, lonely shadows upon it. I was sitting on the sofa, lost in thought, paying no attention to the old movie playing on the TV. The dinner I had carefully prepared had long gone cold on the dining table. The plate cover couldn't contain the aroma of the food, a scent that now seemed like a silent complaint. My husband, Jake, hadn't come home for dinner. Again. A single phone call to say he had an important meeting with a client. It was an excuse so familiar I no longer even bothered to question it. For almost a year, dining alone, surrounded by these 4 walls, had become a terrifyingly normal routine. I let out a long sigh and reached for the remote to turn off the TV and go to bed. Just then, the sharp ring of the landline shattered the night's silence. I jumped. Who could be calling at this hour? Well past midnight. All my friends and family had my cell number. A bad feeling, an inexplicable anxiety, began to coil in my stomach. When I picked up, I heard an unfamiliar man's voice, serious and firm. "Excuse me, is this the residence of Mr. Jacob Thompson? I'm Detective Evans with the Midtown South Precinct." I felt my heart drop to my feet. The police? Why were the police calling me at this hour? All sorts of horrible thoughts raced through my mind. Had Jake been in an accident, driving drunk? Or maybe he'd been mugged on his way home? Trying to keep my voice from trembling, I replied, "Yes, this is she. I'm his wife. What's wrong?" The detective on the other end of the line hesitated for a moment. "Ma'am, I need you to remain calm. Your husband is in the emergency room at NYU Langone Hospital. His condition, it doesn't look good. Could you please come to the hospital immediately?" Each of his words was like a hammer blow to my head. Hospital. Emergency room. Grave condition. My mind went blank. I barely heard the rest of his instructions. I only managed to ask for the hospital's address again before hanging up in a rush. I ran to the bedroom, frantically searching for my purse. My hands were shaking so badly that I dropped my keys, which clattered loudly on the hardwood floor. Without even time to change out of my silk pajamas, I threw on a light jacket and ran out of the apartment. Inside the taxi, speeding through the city streets, the New York skyline seemed alien and blurred. The bright neon lights of Times Square and the glowing billboards were now just meaningless smudges of color. My heart was in a vice. I clasped my hands together and prayed fervently that Jake would be okay, that nothing had happened to him. He was my husband, the man I loved and with whom I had promised to spend the rest of my life. Although he had grown colder lately and often came home late, I had chalked it up to work stress. He was still the pillar of our family, the man I loved. I couldn't imagine my life without him. The worst possibilities tormented me. A terrible car accident, an assault, a sudden, severe illness. The more I thought, the more my fear grew, and hot tears began to stream down my cheeks. The taxi driver, sensing my distress, sped up without a word. The moment the taxi stopped at the ER entrance, I threw open the door and ran out, not even waiting for my change. The hospital's characteristic smell of antiseptic hit me, and my tension reached its peak. I rushed inside, my eyes scanning for familiar faces, and then I saw them. My father-in-law, Arthur, my mother-in-law, Patricia, and my brother-in-law, Stephen, with his wife, Lauren. They were already there, their faces etched with anxiety. As soon as she saw me, my mother-in-law, Patricia, ran towards me, grabbing my hands and bursting into tears. "Kate! Our Jake! He's dying! The doctor says they need a lot of money. It's the only way they can save him." Her words were like a bucket of ice water. My legs gave out, and I had to lean against the wall to keep from collapsing. My brother-in-law, Stephen, came over and gave me a few clumsy pats on the shoulder. "Kate, calm down. The doctors are doing everything they can. We just have to be prepared, mentally and financially." Lauren, my sister-in-law, stood behind her mother, saying nothing, but her eyes darted towards my handbag. In my state of shock, I didn't notice that sharp, calculating gaze. I wanted to find a doctor or a nurse to ask what had happened, but everyone was rushing past me. The air was thick with anxiety and fear. Just then, the emergency room doors swung open, and a middle-aged doctor with a tired face came out, pulling off his surgical mask. My in-laws rushed towards him, surrounding him. I pushed my way through them, my heart pounding violently. "Doctor, my son, he's okay, right?" my mother-in-law asked, her voice trembling and broken. The doctor looked at all of us with a compassionate expression. He shook his head and said quietly, "I'm so sorry." The patient suffered a massive heart attack. By the time he arrived, his heart had already stopped. We did everything we could, but we were unable to revive him. "You need to be strong." Everything around me seemed to stop. I could only hear a growing buzz in my ears. The terrible news was a sharp blade that cruelly and relentlessly pierced my heart. Jake was dead. My husband was dead. I couldn't believe that the man who had called me just that afternoon to say he was almost home was no longer in this world. I couldn't accept this harsh reality. My chest felt torn apart, and I struggled to breathe as if someone were strangling me. I wanted to scream, to cry my lungs out, but my throat was dry, and no sound would come out. My mother-in-law let out a piercing shriek and collapsed to the floor. My father-in-law and brother-in-law quickly held her up. Lauren covered her mouth with her hand, but in her eyes there wasn't a trace of sadness, only bewilderment and a strange disappointment. The hospital corridor filled with Patricia's gut-wrenching sobs, and I, in the midst of the pain and chaos, remained motionless. It had all been so sudden that I was unable to process it. While my in-laws were lost in their turmoil, two uniformed police officers approached. One of them was Detective Evans, the one who had called me. He looked at me with sympathy and then, as if reading from an unimportant case file, began to speak in an objective tone. "My deepest condolences. For the case report, I need to confirm a few facts. Tonight, around 10 p.m., we received a call from a neighbor about strange noises and shouting in an apartment in the East Village. When we arrived, the door was unlocked. We found Mr. Jacob Thompson on the floor, unconscious and disheveled. I tried to piece together the information, hanging on his every word. An apartment in the East Village? Why was Jake in an apartment there at that hour? He was supposed to be at a business dinner. The detective continued, and each word carved a deeper wound in my heart. When we arrived, there was another woman with Mr. Thompson. According to her statement, they were together when Mr. Thompson clutched his chest, complained of severe pain, and collapsed. She claims she panicked, called 911, and then fled the scene. Another woman. Those two words echoed in my head, sharp and clear, shattering the last illusion I had left. My husband had not only cheated on me, but he had died in his lover's bed. This horrible truth was more painful than the news of his death. It was an unbearable humiliation, an unforgivable betrayal. My in-laws were also stunned. My father-in-law's face, always stern and serious, turned to stone. My mother-in-law stopped crying, lifted her head, looked at the police officer, and then at me. Her gaze was filled with suspicion. My brother-in-law and his wife exchanged a look, and a complex expression crossed their faces. In an instant, the pain of losing my husband transformed into disgust and rage. It turned out I had been a fool all this time. Me, at home, making him dinner, worrying about his health, believing his every word. And all the while, he was with another woman in a rented apartment, paid for with the money I thought he was earning through hard work. My love, my sacrifice, my loyalty, it had all become a ridiculous joke in a single moment. I felt my blood run cold. The image of Jake lying next to another woman was seared into my mind, making me feel nauseous. I didn't cry. The tears had dried up, leaving only a vast emptiness and a bitter sense of betrayal. I had lost my husband, but the most terrible thing was realizing that I had lost him a long time ago without knowing it. The man I loved and trusted had died long before his heart stopped beating. The one lying in the morgue was simply a liar, a traitor. Before I could even process the pain and humiliation, my sister-in-law, Lauren, approached. Her voice was low, but her words pricked my ears like thorns. "Kate, I'm so sorry things ended this way, but you can't fall apart. You need to take care of yourself. The most important thing now is to give Jake a proper funeral. The hospital expenses and everything else won't be cheap." As she finished her sentence, she shot a quick glance at my purse. Inside, I always carried the platinum card my parents had given me as a wedding gift. In her gaze, there wasn't an ounce of compassion, only calculation and urgency. I remained silent, my heart growing colder by the second. Seeing that I wasn't reacting, my mother-in-law intervened. She was no longer crying, and her voice had become shrill. "Yes, that's right. Jake was your husband, as well as my son. Now that he's gone, as his wife, it's your responsibility to give him a funeral worthy of our family. Where's your credit card? The one with the $500,000 limit. Use it so our son can have a dignified farewell so we can keep up appearances." My father-in-law didn't speak, but he nodded in agreement. "Your mother is right. Let's take care of Jake first. We'll worry about the rest later." My brother-in-law also chimed in. "That's right, Kate. We're in a tough spot financially right now. Where are we going to get the money for a funeral? You're Jake's wife, and your assets are his assets. If you don't do it, who will?" The family I had always respected, calling them Dad, Mom, Stephen, Lauren, now surrounded me, but not to comfort me or share my pain, only to demand money. Their son, their brother, had just died, and before his body was even cold, the first thing they thought about was money, my $500,000 platinum card. In that moment, I saw the hypocrisy, the greed, and the cruelty of this family with perfect clarity. To them, I was nothing more than a golden goose, a tool from which to extract money. All the affection and kindness they had shown me until now was nothing but a sham. They weren't mourning Jake's death. They were only worried about losing their source of income, the son through whom they could live off their wealthy daughter-in-law. They didn't even bother to ask why Jake had died in his lover's apartment. My pain and humiliation meant nothing to them. Their only interest was how they could get money out of me, even in this tragic situation. It was a reality check so cruel it completely cleared my mind. I looked them in the eyes, one by one. On my mother-in-law's face, there was no longer a trace of grief, only demand. On my sister-in-law's, impatience. On my brother-in-law's, pressure. And my father-in-law, though silent, looked at me with the same approval. They were a flock of vultures waiting to devour the corpse. A wave of rage surged from within me, even stronger than the pain. They had awakened another person inside me, a person I didn't even know existed, strong, decisive, and unyielding. I took a deep breath. The cold hospital air couldn't extinguish the fire of anger burning in my chest. I lifted my head and stared at the four people surrounding me. The voice that came from my mouth no longer trembled with sadness. It was cold and sharp, to a degree that surprised even me. "Funeral expenses? Your son, your brother, just dishonored this family by dying with another woman, and not one of you has thought to ask me how I feel. Or is money more important to all of you than this humiliating death?" My words fell on them like a splash of cold water. The four of them froze, as if they couldn't imagine I would dare to say such a thing. My mother-in-law stammered, "What are you saying? How insolent! Your husband just died. Have I said anything untrue?" I interrupted, raising my voice even higher. "Your son hasn't brought a single dollar home in months. Do you know where his entire salary went? Probably to support his mistress and pay for the apartment where she lived." I looked deeply into the eyes of my in-laws. "You're all right. I am his wife, and I have a responsibility. But my responsibility is not to clean up the mess of my husband's dissolute life and betrayal with my parents' money. He didn't die working for his family. He died seeking pleasure. Why should I be the one to pay the price?" Silence fell. They looked at me as if I were a stranger. They probably never imagined that their docile, patient daughter-in-law would rebel like this. Seeing that they didn't know what to say, I decided to deliver the final blow. Before their astonished eyes, I calmly took my cell phone out of my purse. Without looking at them, I quickly found the number for my bank's customer service. The dial tone echoed eerily in the silent hallway. "Customer service, how can I help you?" "Hello," I said in a clear, firm voice. "My name is Catherine Miller, holder of the platinum card number. I would like to request an immediate and total freeze on my card with the $500,000 limit." My sister-in-law Lauren's mouth fell open, her eyes wide. My mother-in-law, snapping out of her shock, lunged at me to grab the phone, screaming, "Are you crazy? What do you think you're doing? Stop it right now." I took a step back, dodging her hand. My brother-in-law, his face red with anger, also shouted, "Kate, what kind of joke is this? Do you know what you're doing? I held up a hand to silence them and continued speaking to the operator. Yes, I confirm the request. The reason is risk of fraudulent use. Please process it immediately. Only after receiving confirmation from the bank that the card's limit had been successfully frozen did I hang up, look up, and stare at my in-laws, whose faces had changed completely in an instant. I didn't feel a shred of regret. Their anger was about to explode, but I was no longer afraid. This was just the beginning. Seeing that she couldn't stop me, my mother-in-law collapsed into a waiting room chair and began to beat her thighs while cursing me. Oh, what have we done to deserve this? What sin did our family commit for you to enter it as a daughter-in-law? You ungrateful viper! Your husband hasn't even been dead a day, and you're already betraying him. Are you even human? She screamed and wailed, attracting the attention of people passing by, but her words no longer hurt me. I looked at her with a mixture of pity and coldness. Mom, I called her for the last time, my voice icy. Since I entered this house as your daughter-in-law, have I ever failed in my duties? I have never disrespected you, nor have I ever given Jake any trouble. And what have I received in return? My husband's deceit and the greed of his entire family. I owe this family nothing. I looked directly at my father-in-law and brother-in-law. And one more thing. Just so we're clear, the apartment on the Upper East Side is separate property, a gift from my parents before the wedding. The deed is solely in my name. It is not marital property and has nothing to do with the Thompson family, so don't even dream about it. Each of my words was firm and clear. Lauren turned pale at the mention of the apartment. My mother-in-law stopped shouting, her mouth agape. My father-in-law, Arthur, who had been silent until now, finally spoke in a hoarse voice. Are you planning to throw us all out on the street? I'm not throwing anyone out, I replied. That house is mine, and all decisions about it are mine to make. As for Jake's body, I believe it should be handled by the people responsible for his death and his family. I'm leaving. With that, I turned and walked away without looking back. Behind me, I could hear my mother-in-law's hysterical screams, my brother-in-law's impotent curses, and my father-in-law's stunned silence. As I left the hospital, I took a deep breath of the night air. I felt empty, but strangely light. My marriage had ended in the most tragic way possible, but at the same time, it had set me free. Walking down a quiet street, I took out my phone. This time, I didn't call any family or friends. I looked through my contacts for the number of a real estate agent I had known for a long time. Mr. Davis, it's Kate, I said, my voice surprisingly calm. I need to sell the Upper East Side apartment urgently. The price isn't the most important thing. Even if it's a little below market, I need it sold as quickly as possible. The man on the other end of the line seemed a bit surprised by my sudden request, but like a true professional, he quickly understood the situation. Understood, Kate. I'll take care of it. I'll send someone over tomorrow to take photos and get it on the market. Thank you. I hung up and hailed a cab to go back to what I had once called home, but I knew I wouldn't be staying there for long. I had to cut all ties as quickly and decisively as possible. When the apartment door opened, I was greeted by an icy silence. Everything was exactly as I had left it. The cold dinner was still on the table, the TV in standby mode. But to my eyes, this place was no longer a home. It was just an empty shell filled with false memories and betrayal. I didn't go into the master bedroom. I went straight to the study that Jake often used, saying he needed to focus on work. My heart was pounding, not with excitement, but with hatred. The intuition of a wife, which I had tried to ignore for so long, now guided me with crystal clarity. I opened his desk drawers. On top were neatly organized contract documents, but I didn't stop there. I reached my hand deep inside. There, in a black leather folder he rarely touched, was a stack of papers. I took it out and placed it on the desk. The first thing I saw was a lease agreement. The address was precisely the one the detective had mentioned, an apartment in the East Village. The tenant was Jacob Thompson. The lease term was 1 year, and the start date was almost a year ago. I reread the date on the contract several times, my chest aching. Almost a year. He had been cheating on me for almost a year. The days he said he had work trips to other cities, the nights he came home late from client dinners, they were all trips to his other home. My hands were trembling. I turned to the next page. There were countless utility bills for that apartment. Among them were receipts from luxury hotels for weekends when he had told me he had to see distant clients. But what completely shattered me was at the bottom. A small red velvet box. Inside, a purchase receipt from a famous jewelry store, a very expensive diamond necklace. The date of purchase was a few months ago, on my birthday. That day, he had told me an unexpected work trip had come up and had sent me a terse happy birthday text. It turns out he was busy buying a gift for his mistress. And the cruelest part of all was the payment details. Family supplementary card, name, Catherine Miller. He had used my own money, the family card I had entrusted to him, to buy a gift for another woman. Hatred boiled in my veins. I didn't scream or cry. I just sat there, staring at those indifferent papers, the irrefutable proof of his betrayal. The pain turned to contempt. I carefully gathered everything and put it in a separate bag. This would be my weapon. I wasn't going to let them walk all over me anymore. I wasn't going to let him and his family continue to take advantage of me. I had been too naive. It was time to save myself. I was sitting on the living room sofa, the evidence of Jake's infidelity spread out on the coffee table. I don't know how long I sat like that. Dawn was beginning to break outside the window. My mind was blank, yet at the same time, extremely lucid. As I was planning my next move, the doorbell began to ring frantically, accompanied by loud banging and the familiar screams of my mother-in-law. "Catherine Miller, you witch, open this door right now! Do you plan to keep everything that belonged to my son? Open up!" Her shrill voice echoed through the silent apartment. Next came my brother-in-law's threatening tone. "Kate, don't play deaf. Open the door and let's talk this out properly. If you don't open up, we'll break it down." The whole family had come. It was clear that after being powerless at the hospital, they had come straight here to pressure me and demand what they considered their right. I stayed still. I knew that opening the door now would be like walking into a lion's den. They wouldn't reason. They would only attack me with verbal venom and violence, demanding I give them the money and the house. The banging on the door grew louder, as if they were about to break through the solid wood. Lauren, my sister-in-law, also joined my mother-in-law's shouting. "Kate, how can you be like this? Your husband just died, and you're already thinking about money. Open the door. Let's talk things over calmly. We're family." Her voice sounded sweet, but her intention was as sharp as a knife. Family? How ridiculous. I laughed to myself. I didn't answer or make a sound. Calmly, I picked up my phone, activated the voice recorder, and placed it on the table with the microphone pointing towards the door. I needed to record all these threats and insults. They would be useful later. After recording for a while, I decided I couldn't let the situation continue. They were going to disturb the neighbors, and I didn't want the scandal to escalate. I looked up the number for building security in my contacts. Security. Good morning. "Hello," I said, my voice as calm and clear as I could manage. "This is Catherine Miller, the resident of 5B. There's a group of people outside my door, banging, yelling, and threatening me. They're saying they're going to break the door down. Can you please send someone to stop them? I feel threatened." "Understood, ma'am. Do not leave your apartment. We're sending a security team up immediately." After hanging up, I felt a sense of calm return. Outside, the yelling and banging continued, but I knew their show was about to end. A few minutes later, I heard the whir of a golf cart and the firm voices of the security guards. My mother-in-law's insults turned into an argument, and gradually, everything quieted down. They had been escorted out. I sighed in relief, but a new determination formed within me. I couldn't stay here. They were gone today, but they would be back tomorrow or the day after. I had to leave immediately, before they found another way to torment me. When the silence returned, I didn't rest. Physical exhaustion couldn't overcome the urge to act that I felt. I knew I didn't have much time. My greedy and persistent in-laws wouldn't give up easily. They would be back soon, perhaps more violently. I got up and went quickly to the bedroom, but not to pack clothes. First, from behind a painting on the wall, I retrieved a small briefcase where I kept important documents: the deed to the apartment, my passport, some cash, and all the jewelry my parents had given me as a wedding gift. I carefully placed all of this into a small crossbody bag. Next, I took the bag with the evidence of Jake's infidelity, checked it one last time, and put it in a suitcase. This was my leverage. Only then did I start to pack some clothes. I didn't try to take everything, just some essential items and personal belongings. I left behind everything Jake had ever bought me: our wedding photos, the mementos of our love, Looking at them no longer brought nostalgia, only a mocking smile. It was all part of the charade he had created. Dragging 2 large suitcases, I felt as light as a feather. In reality, the idea of finding a new place hadn't been an impulsive decision. About 6 months ago, sensing Jake's growing distance, my woman's intuition had led me to quietly prepare an escape route. With my own savings, I had rented a small studio apartment in another borough, far from here. I lied to Jake, telling him I was letting a friend from out of town use it temporarily. The studio was small, but the security was excellent, and most importantly, no one knew of its existence. That was now my safe haven. Around midnight, when the whole neighborhood was asleep, I made my move. I called a car service and asked the driver to wait for me on the street corner, not directly in front of the building. I turned off all the lights in the apartment, opened the door carefully, and peeked outside. After making sure no one was watching, I quietly wheeled out the 2 suitcases, locked the door, and walked quickly to the waiting car. Sitting in the car, I took one last look at the building. The dim light of the street lamps illuminated the white facade, giving it a lonely, cold appearance. This place had been a dream, my pride, the home I had built. But now, it was nothing more than a gilded cage that had imprisoned my naive youth. As I drove away, I felt no sadness, only an immense sense of liberation. Goodbye, past. Goodbye, my foolishness. The car was taking me towards a new chapter of my life. The studio I had rented was on the 15th floor of a modern building. From the hallway, you could see a part of the city's sparkling nightscape. It was much smaller than the apartment, just 1 bedroom and a living room with an integrated kitchen. But when I put the key in the lock and opened the door, I was met with a clean, cozy space. I knew this was my true safe harbor, free of lies and greed. That night, for the first time since that horrible day, I was able to close my eyes, though nightmares still haunted my dreams. The next morning, I woke up to sunbeams streaming through the window. I dragged my tired body out of bed, made myself a coffee, and sat at the table, lost in thought. Everything that had happened in the last few days played through my mind like a slow-motion film, vivid and painful. But I didn't allow myself to break down. I still had much to do. First on the list was calling the real estate agent again to speed up the sale of the apartment. Just as I was about to dial the number, the doorbell rang. I jumped, filled with suspicion. Could it be my in-laws? Had they found me so quickly? I cautiously approached the door and looked through the peephole. It wasn't my in-laws outside. There was a young woman, tall and stylishly dressed. Designer clothes, an expensive handbag, a perfectly made-up face. She was beautiful, but her expression was arrogant and defiant. I didn't know her, but my gut told me this meeting was no coincidence. I took a deep breath, calmly put the security chain on, and opened the door slightly. "Excuse me, who are you looking for?" She looked me up and down with a smirk. "Catherine Miller, right? Jake's wife." "Yes, that's me. Who are you?" "My name is Monica. I was Jake's girlfriend." She said it without a hint of doubt or guilt, with utter shamelessness. We were together for almost a year. Girlfriend. She dared to come here and introduce herself as my husband's girlfriend. Her audacity surprised me, but I didn't get angry. I just looked at her coldly, waiting to see what she wanted. "I see. And what have you come for?" "My husband is dead." "I suppose your relationship with him is over too." "Over?" Monica scoffed. "You make it sound so easy. The one who's suffering the most from Jake's death is me. You were just his wife on paper. The one he truly loved was me." I clenched my fists. This blatant provocation was hard to bear. "Get to the point. What do you want?" Seeing that I wasn't getting upset, Monica seemed a little disappointed. She stopped beating around the bush and got straight to it. Before he died, Jake promised he would give me $300,000 to buy a small house, our love nest. He told me he was going to divorce you and marry me. Now he's gone, but his promise still stands. You, as his wife, have the responsibility to fulfill it. Give me the $300,000. Consider it compensation for the youth and love I dedicated to him. If you do, I'll never bother you again. I almost laughed at her shamelessness. Compensation? She had inserted herself into my marriage, lived a life of luxury on my money, and now that my husband was dead, she was demanding compensation. Could anyone be more brazen? I looked Monica, my husband's mistress, up and down. The smile on my lips wasn't one of kindness, but of contempt. Instead of the anger she might have expected, I displayed a surprising calm. "Sensuan a promise," I repeated in a mocking tone. "Do you have any document to prove it, or is it just the word of a dead man?" Monica seemed to lose her patience. "I don't have time to argue with you. Jake loved me, and he promised me. If you don't believe me, that's your problem. If you don't give me the money, I'll make sure this whole building knows what kind of wife you were, that your husband had to find someone else. Let's see how your reputation holds up then." "Ah, a threat," I smiled faintly. "All right, but before you make a scene, why don't you come in? Have some tea and see something interesting." With that, I unlatched the chain and swung the door wide open. My confident demeanor seemed to surprise and confuse Monica a bit, but she probably thought I was scared and wanted to negotiate, so she walked in with an arrogant air and sat on the sofa as if she owned the place. Without a word, I went to the bedroom and returned with the bag full of evidence. I emptied it onto the coffee table in front of her, the lease agreement, the utility bills, the hotel receipts, and finally, the receipt for the necklace purchase. "Look," I said, my voice as cold as ice, "this is the love nest he prepared for you, isn't it? The monthly rent was paid with my money. The trips to luxury hotels you took together were also charged to my card." Monica's face began to change. She looked at the papers on the table with trembling hands. I picked up the jewelry store receipt and pointed to the sparkling necklace she was wearing. "And this necklace is beautiful. He gave it to you on my birthday. And you know what? He paid for it with my family card too. Right now, you're wearing my humiliation, my husband's betrayal, and my money around your neck, dear mistress." Monica's face turned white as a sheet. She stammered, "No, that can't be. Jake told me it was his money, earned with his own hard work." "Earned with his hard work?" I burst out laughing, a bitter laugh. "His salary was a pittance. It barely covered his car payment each month. The entire life of luxury he showed you was built on my foolishness and my money. You weren't the woman he loved. You were just an expensive ornament to show off to the world." I leaned in and whispered in her ear, my voice low but clear so she wouldn't miss a single word. "So, do you still want your $300,000 in compensation? Or would you prefer I report you to the police for extortion? Or something simpler? How about I post all this evidence online, along with your name, age, and address? Let's see how the beloved girlfriend of the deceased fares when everyone is pointing fingers at her. Choose." Monica trembled from head to toe. Her arrogant, defiant attitude from before had completely vanished, leaving only sheer terror. She looked at me as if she were seeing a demon. She would never have imagined that the docile, submissive wife could be so biting and cruel. "I'm sorry, I didn't know. Please, forgive me," Monica burst into tears, begging. "Get out," I shouted. "Get out of here before I change my mind, and don't ever show your face to me again." Terrified, Monica scrambled to her feet, tripped over the leg of the coffee table, and stumbled out the door as if a ghost were chasing her, not daring to look back at me. The door slammed shut, and the room was silent again. I sank into the chair, feeling completely exhausted. I had won the first battle, but I knew I still had a long way to go. After kicking out my husband's mistress, I felt a new surge of energy. There was no more time for sentimentality or sadness. I called Mr. Davis, the real estate agent. My voice was firm. "Mr. Davis, it's Kate. How's the sale of the apartment going?" "Kate, I was just about to call you." "Mr." Davis's voice on the other end of the line was excited. "Good news. I listed it this morning, and by this afternoon, we already have an interested party who wants to see it. It's a young couple, very decisive and financially solid. I have a really good feeling about this. I'm so glad to hear that. Please get everything ready so they can see it comfortably. I've left the keys with the doorman." I spoke calmly. I didn't want to go back to that place. I didn't want to face the bad memories or risk running into my in-laws. "Understood. I'll call you as soon as the viewing is over. Don't worry." I hung up, feeling much lighter. Focusing on tasks kept me from dwelling on the past. I busied myself cleaning and organizing the small studio, making it completely my own space, just as Mr. Davis had said. He called me back in the afternoon, his voice brimming with joy. "Kate, the buyers loved the apartment. It's beautiful, the location is perfect, and they really liked the basic furniture you left. Most importantly, they find the price you set so reasonable compared to the market that they want to sign an earnest money agreement right away. My heart beat a little faster. Seriously? They want to put down a deposit already? Yes, to secure it. They want to meet you in person to discuss the details and give you the deposit. Let me know when works for you. Perhaps our office would be the most comfortable setting. This was exactly what I wanted. A quick start. Yes, Mr. Davis. How about tomorrow at 9 a.m.? I'll come to your office. Perfect. It's a date. I'll contact the buyers. The conversation ended better than expected. With the phone in my hand, I looked out the window. The sunset was painting the New York sky orange. For the first time after so many dark days, I felt a faint ray of hope for the future. Selling the house would not only provide me with a significant sum of money to start over, but more importantly, it meant a complete break with the past, with the people and the pain I wanted to bury forever. Soon, I would have enough capital and freedom to start a new life, a life where I would be the sole architect. Before meeting the buyers, I decided to call Sarah, my one and only best friend in the city. Since everything had exploded, I had turned off my phone and cut off all contact to avoid being bothered. But now that things were starting to fall into place, I needed someone to share it with. You! Where have you been? I've been calling you non-stop. Sarah's voice came through the phone as soon as I answered. I've had my reasons, I said with a heavy heart. But I'm okay now. Where are you? Do you have time? Come to the cafe near my place. Of course I have time. If something's wrong, I'll drop everything. Send me the address. I'm on my way. I met Sarah at our usual cafe. I told her everything, holding nothing back. Jake's death, his family's true colors, the shameless mistress. As she listened, Sarah's expression went from shock to pure outrage. She slammed her hand on the table and let out a curse. What kind of people are they? They're worse than animals. How can people like that exist? Kate, you've been too good. If it were me, I would have blasted them all over social media so they couldn't even show their faces in public. Let it go, I shook my head. Why create more drama? It would only exhaust me more. I just want to resolve everything quietly and quickly. Sarah looked at me with a mixture of pity and admiration. You're much stronger than I thought. So, what are you going to do now? I'm selling the apartment. It looks like it's almost done. When I have the money, I'll start over. I'll do something. Hearing my words, Sarah nodded. Suddenly, she looked at me with a very strange expression, a mix of pity and satisfaction. Speaking of your ex-in-laws, I have something to tell you, but I don't know if I should. What is it? Tell me. Yesterday, on my way home from work, I was driving under an overpass on the BQE. Isabel hesitated. I saw a group of people sitting there, on the ground. They looked awful. It was so sad. I took a closer look, and I couldn't believe my eyes. It was your father-in-law, mother-in-law, brother-in-law, and his wife. I froze. Really? Are you sure? 100% sure. I pulled over to get a better look. Your mother-in-law was sitting there crying. Your father-in-law had a vacant look in his eyes, and your brother-in-law and his wife were screaming at each other, probably about money. They were a pathetic sight. I guess after you kicked them out, with no money and nowhere to go, they've ended up living there. Hearing Sarah's words, an indescribable feeling rose within me. It wasn't compassion at all. It was more like a cold satisfaction, poetic justice. This was the immediate punishment for their greed and cruelty. They had lived like kings in my apartment, spending my money and treating me like an ATM. Now that they had no one to depend on, they had fallen to the very bottom of society. Without a word, I took a silent sip of my coffee. The bitterness of the coffee couldn't compare to the bitterness that family must be tasting right now. The next morning, as planned, I had to return to the apartment to collect some important documents before handing it over to the new owners. I went early, hoping not to run into anyone, but fate seems to have a strange sense of humor. Just as I was closing the door and about to get into a taxi, a familiar figure appeared and blocked my path. It was my sister-in-law Lauren, but her current appearance was a far cry from her usual elegant and arrogant image. Her hair was messy, her clothes were wrinkled, and her face was pale and haggard from lack of sleep. Her red, swollen eyes looked at me with a mixture of hatred and pleading. "Kate," she said my name in a hoarse voice. I looked at her coldly, without responding, and tried to walk past her. But Lauren was faster, spreading her arms to block my way. "Wait, Let's just talk for a couple of minutes. You and I have nothing to talk about, I replied in a neutral tone. Yes, we do, Lauren said urgently, her voice trembling. Kate, I know my family and I treated you horribly. We were wrong. I apologize on behalf of all of us. Can't you forgive us? It was such a clumsy performance. The old me might have softened, but not the new me. I knew perfectly well that this apology wasn't born of remorse, but of the desperation of being cornered. Forgiveness? Do you think a simple apology can erase everything? Can your forgiveness give me back the trust I lost? Can it resurrect my husband as a decent man? Lauren lowered her head and wrung her hands. I know it can't, but my family is going through a really tough time right now. Since that day, we have nowhere to go, and we've run out of money. My in-laws are old and weak, and my son has had a fever for days. We're living under an overpass. It's horrible. Kate, please, have mercy. Couldn't you lend us some money? Just for old time's sake, just enough to get us through this crisis, to rent a room. I swear we'll pay you back, I promise. Seeing her miserable state, I didn't feel a shred of compassion. I just found it ridiculous. Old time's sake? Did you think of old time's sake when you demanded money from me for my husband's humiliating funeral? Did you think of old time's sake when you were banging on my door, insulting me and slandering me? I looked her straight in the eye and said in a voice as cold as ice, Listen to me carefully, Lauren. Not 1 cent of my money will be spent on people like you. The suffering you are going through today is a direct consequence of your actions. Stop the theatrics and the pity party. Get out of my way. With that, I firmly pushed her arm aside and walked towards the waiting taxi. Lauren stood there, stunned, as if she couldn't believe I could be so ruthless. Behind me, I heard her scream in a voice full of hatred, Catherine Miller, you are a heartless bitch. You'll get what's coming to you. I didn't turn back, just smiled to myself. Karma. You are the ones who are getting what you deserve. The show is over. Stepping into Mr. Davis's real estate office, I felt an invisible weight lift off my shoulders. Leaving the unpleasant encounter with my sister-in-law behind, I focused completely on my goal. The young couple was already there, waiting. They were kind, polite, and seemed very excited. Hi, said the husband, standing up to shake my hand with a friendly smile. I'm Paul, and this is my wife, Sophie. We absolutely love your apartment. Hello, I replied with a smile, a business smile, but a sincere one. I'm glad the apartment has found good new owners. Mr. Davis led us to the meeting table. All the documents and contracts were already prepared. The process was incredibly smooth and fast. Paul and Sophie didn't haggle or raise any issues, just asked a few details about the title transfer and the paperwork. Their friendly demeanor made me feel very comfortable. After carefully reviewing the contract clauses, Paul and I signed. Immediately after, as promised, Paul transferred 50% of the home's price to my account. The sound of the deposit notification on my phone had never sounded so sweet. It wasn't just a number. It was my ticket to freedom, a solid foundation for my new future. Thank you so much. We can't wait for the paperwork to be completed quickly so we can move into our new home, said Sophie happily. Of course. I will cooperate with Mr. Davis to make sure everything is expedited as much as possible. We said goodbye with another handshake. Mr. Davis walked the couple to the door and, upon returning, patted my shoulder with a satisfied look. Congratulations, Kate. It was a very quick and clean sale. I did well out of it, too. What are you planning to do now with the money? I looked out the window at the bustling people on the street. I don't know yet, Mr. Davis. Maybe I'll take some time in a quiet place to get my thoughts in order, and then we'll see. That's a good idea. You've been through a lot. You need time to heal. Mr. Davis looked at me empathetically. After leaving the office, I wandered through the streets. I had a large sum of money in my possession, but I didn't feel overwhelming joy. My heart was strangely calm. I knew this was a turning point, but I was also aware that money couldn't erase all the wounds of the soul. It only offered me an opportunity, a foundation to get back up and move forward. The path ahead was still mine to decide, and this time I wouldn't give anyone the power to hurt me. I thought that after my encounter with Lauren, my in-laws would give up, but I was wrong. I underestimated their shamelessness and tenacity. A few days after signing the sales contract, as I was returning from the supermarket with my hands full of bags, a tragic scene awaited me at the entrance of my building. The 4 members of the Thompson family were sitting on the ground, right at the entrance. They looked even more miserable than Sarah had described. Dirty, disheveled clothes, haggard faces. As soon as they saw me from a distance, my mother-in-law was the first to run towards me, but this time she didn't insult me. She suddenly knelt at my feet, clung to my pants with both hands, and began to cry inconsolably. "Kate, my dear daughter, I was wrong, 1,000 times wrong. Please forgive me. Look at our family. We're living on the streets, begging. Please, have mercy. Save us." Her performance attracted the attention of all the passing neighbors. I started to hear murmurs. My father-in-law also approached, stumbling, lowered his head, and said in a trembling voice, "Yes, Kate, I have nothing to say, but even if it's just for the memory of the late Jake, give us a chance to live." My brother-in-law and Lauren were not far behind. They both knelt beside my mother-in-law, crying and lamenting their suffering and their sick child. They were putting on the perfect play of the poor family, cruelly abandoned by their rich daughter-in-law right after their husband's death. The people around, who didn't know the story, began to look at me with reproachful and judgmental eyes. "That girl is dressed so well. How can she treat her in-laws like that? How ungrateful. Her husband dies, and she throws his parents out on the street. Poor old people. It's so sad." Those words pricked my skin like needles, but I was no longer the weak, easily manipulated Kate from before. I knew they were using public opinion to pressure me. If I got angry, I would only be proving that I was the evil person they claimed I was. Calmly, I placed my grocery bags on the ground. I didn't try to lift them up or argue with them. I just looked at them coldly and then addressed the crowd, raising my voice. Not much, but enough for everyone to hear me. "Ladies and gentlemen, I know what you're thinking, but in family matters, you should never listen to just one side of the story." I spoke serenely. "My husband's death has caused me great pain, but the circumstances under which he died are something my in-laws and my brother and sister-in-law here know very well. He cheated on his wife for almost a year. He supported another woman with his wife's money and died precisely in that mistress's bed. Although I am his widow, I have no obligation to pay the debts of his betrayal with my parents' assets." Upon hearing my words, the crowd was stunned and began to look at my in-laws with different eyes. Seeing that their pity play was no longer working, my mother-in-law instantly changed her tune, jumped up, pointed her finger at me, and insulted me. "You! How dare you slander my son? He's dead! Do you think you can just say whatever you want? You insolent girl, you've taken all his fortune and now you're sullying his honor. Look, everyone. This is the kind of daughter-in-law she is. She took our money and our house and threw us out on the street. The farce had reached its climax. They shouted and slandered me, trying to make me the culprit in everyone's eyes. Despite my mother-in-law's quick change of heart and the support of her entire family, I didn't flinch. Rage consumed me, but my mind was surprisingly cold. I knew that arguing with these people was pointless. They would never admit their mistakes. They would continue to trample me to achieve their goal. It was time to put an end to it all. I took a step back, dodging the accusing finger. Calmly, I took out my phone. My brother-in-law, thinking I was going to call my family for help, scoffed. "Go on, call whoever you want. It won't do you any good. Right is on our side." He pounded his chest. But I didn't call friends or family. I dialed a familiar number. 911. "What's your emergency?" I put the phone to my ear and spoke loudly and clearly so my in-laws and everyone around could hear me. "Hello. This is Catherine Miller. I reside at this apartment building. Right now, at the entrance to my building, a group of people is harassing me, shouting, slandering me, and demanding money under threat. They are my late husband's family. I feel a serious threat to my personal safety. I urge you to come and resolve the situation." The Thompson family froze. My mother-in-law stopped screaming and stared at me with wide, incredulous eyes. She would never have imagined that I would dare to call the police. My brother-in-law and Lauren's faces turned pale, and my father-in-law backed away in silence. Seeing the situation escalating, some neighbors tried to mediate. "Young lady, just let it go. Family matters should be settled in private. Calling the police will only make things worse." I looked at them and said firmly, "Thank you for the advice, but this is no longer a family matter. This is public disturbance and extortion. If I don't set a clear boundary, they will continue to harass me and this entire building. About 10 minutes later, 2 police officers arrived. Seeing the uniforms, my in-laws became even more frightened. My mother-in-law tried to make a scene by crying, but one of the officers stopped her with a stern voice. "Quiet. All parties involved, you're coming to the station to give a statement. This is not the place for a spectacle." I briefly explained to the police that they had been harassing and threatening me constantly since my husband's death. I also mentioned that I had recorded evidence of their threats at my old apartment. Finally, the police required all members of the Thompson family to go to the station to give a statement and sign a restraining order that prohibited them from ever harassing me again. As they were being led away, my mother-in-law turned and shot me a venomous look, muttering curses, but I no longer cared. I knew that from now on, my life would no longer be disturbed by them. The last bond of hatred that tied us together had been completely broken. I picked up my grocery bags and went upstairs. I felt light, as if a huge weight that had been pressing down on me for a long time had been lifted. A few weeks later, the paperwork for the apartment sale was completed, and I received the remaining 50% of the payment. Holding the bank statement in my hand, showing a figure I probably could never have earned in a lifetime of work, I didn't feel extreme joy, just a strange sense of peace. This money hadn't fallen from the sky. I had earned it in exchange for tears, betrayal, and my youth. It was the capital, the springboard to rebuild my life. The first thing I did was terminate the lease on the studio. That place had protected me in my worst moments, but it also brought back too many unpleasant memories. I wanted a completely fresh start, a place where no one knew me, with no trace of the past. I rented a serviced apartment in a central part of the city. The security was strict, the management professional, and most importantly, it was completely private. I changed my phone number and cut contact with all my old acquaintances, except for my best friend Sarah. I needed a real break to heal my soul's wounds. For the first few days, I did absolutely nothing. I allowed myself to be lazy, to live without a schedule. I slept when I was tired, ate when I was hungry. I spent hours sitting on the balcony watching the bustling city, reading the books I never had time for, and listening to my favorite music. Little by little, I felt my soul recovering. The pain was still there, but it no longer consumed me or tormented me every night. One afternoon, while strolling down a quiet side street, I passed by a flower shop. The shop wasn't large, but it was charmingly decorated, filled with fresh flowers of all colors. The soft, pure scent of the flowers floating in the air suddenly lightened my heart. I remembered a childhood dream. I had always wanted to have my own flower shop, to live each day surrounded by the fragrance and beauty of flowers. That dream had been buried under the worries of marriage and daily life. But now, with enough means and freedom, what was stopping me from making it a reality? An idea took hold of my mind. This is what I want to do. I didn't want to live an idle life spending the money I had. I wanted to work, to create value, to find joy and meaning in something I loved. The decision was almost instantaneous. I would open a flower shop. That would be my new beginning. A fragrant and colorful beginning, like cherry blossoms. Time flew by, and a year passed in the blink of an eye. I am now the owner of a small, charming flower shop called Serenity, located on a street that's not too loud but always busy. The name was like a declaration of the life I was seeking. The business did better than I expected. I not only sold flowers but also handled decorations for small events and floral arrangements for offices and cafes. I would wake up at dawn to go to the flower market, prepare beautiful bouquets with my own hands, and chat with customers. The work was hard, but it always made me feel happy and full of life. Living each day amidst the scent of flowers, seeing the satisfied smiles on my customers' faces, I felt my life had real meaning. I was no longer the depressed, sad woman haunted by the past. I learned to wear light makeup, to dress in cheerful, elegant clothes. A smile was a constant on my face. If my old friends saw me now, they probably wouldn't recognize me. Through my own efforts, I had found freedom, independence, and the joy of living. Among my regular customers, there was a special man. His name was Daniel, an architect a few years older than me. The first time he came to the shop was to buy an orchid for his mother's birthday. He wasn't particularly flashy, but he exuded a calmness and warmth that drew me in. He spoke softly, was polite, and above all, had a very kind look in his eyes. After that, he started coming to the shop almost every week, sometimes to buy a small bouquet for his desk, other times just to stop by and chat with me for a few minutes. We talked about everything: types of flowers, literary hobbies, life. The more I talked to him, the more I realized that Daniel was a deep, sincere, and very sensitive man. He never asked about my past, but through our conversations, I felt he understood what I had been through. He always made me feel safe and respected. Once, seeing me struggling to fix a broken shelf, he didn't hesitate to roll up his sleeves and help me. Sweat beaded on his forehead, but he always had a smile on his lips. One Sunday afternoon, when the shop was quiet, Daniel showed up, but he didn't buy any flowers that day. He sat quietly on a small chair in a corner, watching me work. When I finished the last bouquet, he finally spoke, his voice deep and warm. "Kate, I have to tell you something." I looked up. The way he was looking at me was different. There was a bit of nervousness, but also an overwhelming sincerity. "Tell me. Maybe it's a bit soon, but my feelings for you are sincere. When I'm with you, I always feel at peace. You're strong, independent, and a wonderful person. I want to build a future with you, a future where I can make you happy and protect you. Would you give me a chance?" His confession wasn't grand or rehearsed, but it shook my heart deeply. After a long, long time, I felt truly valued and loved by a man. Tears welled up in my eyes without warning, but they were tears of happiness. A few days after Daniel's confession, while I was making a flower delivery, I happened to run into an old neighbor from my previous apartment building. She recognized me instantly and greeted me cheerfully. After a few brief words, she suddenly lowered her voice and looked at me with pity. "Honey, even if it was just for a while, they were your family. Have you heard anything about your ex-in-laws?" I shook my head. I didn't feel an ounce of emotion. "No, I haven't had any contact with them for a long time." The neighbor sighed and, as if she couldn't hold back, began to tell me, "It's a real tragedy. The universe pays its debts. Since you left, their lives have fallen apart. Apparently your father-in-law Arthur was so devastated that he had a stroke. He's now bedridden and can barely speak. Your mother-in-law, Patricia, has been seen selling trinkets and sometimes begging at the farmer's market." She paused and clicked her tongue. "But the worst is your brother-in-law and his wife. He's lazy and got hooked on gambling, losing all their money. She, Lauren, couldn't take it anymore, filed for divorce, and went back to her parents' house with their child. Now they say your brother-in-law lives by scavenging from the market dumpsters, and his son might have to drop out of school because they have no money. It's karma, really." After hearing her story, I simply thanked her quietly and said goodbye. In my heart, there was neither satisfaction nor joy, but also no compassion. I felt indifferent. They had simply reaped what they had sown. Their own greed and cruelty had destroyed their lives. I no longer felt resentment. My life had moved on to a new chapter, much brighter and better. Hating them would only tarnish my own soul. That evening, Daniel came to pick me up after I closed the flower shop. We walked together through Central Park. The evening breeze was cool, and the city lights twinkled magically. Daniel held my hand tightly. "Have you thought about my proposal?" I stopped and looked him straight in the eyes full of warmth and trust. I smiled, a radiant and complete smile, and said, "Yes, I accept." I no longer needed a grand wedding or empty promises. I just needed a man like Daniel, who loved me for who I was, who respected my independence, and who was willing to build a simple but happy future with me. There was a time when I thought my life had sunk into darkness, but it hadn't. When one door closed, a much brighter one opened. I had learned a profound lesson. As a woman, you must never depend entirely on anyone else. Only when you are strong on your own, when you stand firmly on your own 2 feet, can you find true happiness and create the life you dream of. My future was now in my hands, and I knew it would be as splendid as my flowers. Thank you for listening to this story to the very end.